The air was thick with tension, and every eye in the cabin was fixed on one thing: the furious exchange happening between a wealthy white passenger and a flight attendant. The man's voice boomed as he leaned forward in his seat, pointing an accusatory finger at the young flight attendant standing in the aisle. "I demand to speak to your manager. How dare you talk to me like that, you—" He stopped mid-sentence, the word hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. The flight attendant, a woman of color in her mid-20s named Maya, stood still, her back straight and her expression calm but resolute. She had heard it all before: racial slurs, belittling comments, the look of entitlement that oozed from people like him. But today, she wasn't backing down. Her voice, though steady, cut through the tension. "Sir, I am the one serving you right now, and if you don't stop speaking to me like that, I will have to call security." The man scoffed, clearly enjoying the power he thought he wielded over her. "Security? You think they'll believe you over me?" He laughed, but it wasn't a sound of amusement. It was the kind of laugh that made the hairs on the back of the neck stand up. Maya's eyes flickered to the flight attendant's button on her service belt, but she didn't press it. No, she had a different plan. She needed to take control of this situation. She needed to make him see, for once in his life, that his racism was not going to stand. The man's voice dropped to a snarl. "You people have no place in first class. Go back to the back where you belong." A ripple of gasps spread through the cabin, but Maya's focus didn't waver. She had dealt with this before, but today, something inside her snapped. Without hesitation, she did the unthinkable. She reached behind her back, pulled out a small piece of paper, and slapped it on his tray table. The man stared at it, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Read it," Maya said, her tone unwavering. The paper was a note she had received during the boarding process, an anonymous letter from a fellow passenger. In neat handwriting, it read, "This flight will show you what it feels like to be judged based on the color of your skin. Buckle up." Maya's fingers hovered over the intercom button again, but the words burned in her mind. Today, she was going to teach this man a lesson he would never forget. As she moved away, the entire cabin was silent, waiting for the next move. The tension was unbearable. But just before she could reach the rear galley, the man's voice rang out again, louder this time. "You can't do this to me." Maya turned back toward him, her face unreadable. "Watch me." She walked straight to the cockpit, her mind focused on the one thing that could end this nightmare. A moment of silence followed. Then, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight delay in our flight schedule. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The words hung in the air like a warning, and the cabin stirred. The man, now livid, began to yell, but his voice was drowned out by the hum of the plane's engines. Something was happening, something he didn't understand yet. Maya turned and looked at the anxious passengers who had been watching. She knew they were on the edge of something, but she wasn't sure if they were ready for what would come next. Before anyone could say another word, the intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't the captain's voice that filled the cabin, it was Maya's. "You want to see what it's like to be judged, sir?" Her voice was clear and firm. "You'll see what it feels like for the next few hours, all because you couldn't keep your racism to yourself." The entire plane fell into stunned silence. What had she just said? Was this part of the plan? Was she serious? But the man was already starting to squirm in his seat, and Maya knew that it was only a matter of time before everything would unfold. Maya returned to the galley, her heart pounding in her chest. She had said those words without fully knowing what was going to happen next, but somehow, she felt a sense of power surge through her. For the first time, it wasn't the passengers who had the upper hand, it was her. But as the minutes ticked by, the weight of her words started to settle in. The man was still fuming, his face turning an angry shade of red, and she could hear the muttered complaints of other passengers. Maya's fingers curled around the edge of the counter as she steeled herself. What had she really done? The captain's voice interrupted her thoughts once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have encountered a slight change in course. Please bear with us while we resolve a small situation in the cabin." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. This was it. The man was about to get a taste of his own medicine. But would it work? Would he understand? Or would she just be making things worse? The seconds felt like hours as she moved swiftly to the back of the plane, her mind racing. She'd seen people speak out against racism before, but had they really faced the consequences that made them think twice? Had the message ever truly sunk in? As she passed the seats in the back, Maya noticed a young woman sitting near the window. She was about 18, her hair tied back in a neat bun. She looked familiar. Maya had seen her boarding, but hadn't really thought much of it. Now, as the girl's gaze met hers, something shifted in the air between them. The girl wasn't looking at her with fear or uncertainty. No, she was staring at Maya with something else. Something Maya had never seen before. Admiration. The girl gave her a subtle nod, like she understood exactly what was happening. Maya wasn't alone in this fight. And somehow, in that moment, it felt like the entire plane had silently sided with her, ready to stand up against the man's ugliness. But Maya didn't have time to dwell on this connection. She was back at her post, the moment before she had taken that drastic step still fresh in her mind. She could hear the man's voice now, louder and more frantic. The plane was nearing its cruising altitude, and the situation was about to spiral. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself. She needed to make sure that this wasn't just an emotional outburst, that it would send a real message. The door to the cockpit opened, and the captain stepped into the galley, his face set in a grim expression. "Maya, we've got a problem. The flight path we're on isn't going to allow us to land at our scheduled airport. We've had to divert." Maya stared at him for a second, shocked. What does that have to do with the man in first class? He sighed. "We received a complaint. Apparently, your words have caused quite a stir, and not just with him. We're getting calls from the ground crew. They're asking us to handle this delicately." Maya's blood ran cold. She had never expected this kind of response, not this soon. The thought that her words were being broadcasted, that people were watching and judging, it shook her to her core. But then, a quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "Maya." She turned to find the young woman from earlier standing in the aisle. She had moved closer, and there was a look of determination in her eyes. "I heard what you said. You're doing the right thing," she whispered, glancing at the captain. The words hit Maya harder than she expected. She had no idea who this girl was, but in that moment, she was giving Maya the validation she needed to keep going. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it was enough. The weight she had been carrying felt a little lighter. As she stepped back toward her position, the cabin door slid open again, and another flight attendant stepped through. She was breathing heavily, her face pale. "Maya, it's getting worse," she said in a rushed tone. "What's going on?" Maya asked, suddenly feeling like the room was closing in on her. The man started texting. "He's called someone important. He says he's going to sue. He's threatening us." Maya took a steadying breath. She could hear the panic in her coworker's voice, but she refused to let herself be rattled. "Let him sue," Maya said, her voice clear and calm. "He can threaten all he wants. I'm not backing down." But deep down, a knot had formed in her stomach. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a battle. A battle that would require more than just words to win. The plane began its descent, the hum of the engines growing louder as the cabin shook slightly. Maya's thoughts raced as the realization hit her. There was no going back. She had made her stand, and it was only a matter of time before everyone knew what had happened on this flight. The passengers were watching her. They were waiting to see how this would end. Would she be vindicated, or would this racist man get the last laugh? The plane's descent seemed slower than usual, as if time itself was dragging its feet, reluctant to bring them back to reality. Maya stood at the front of the cabin, her eyes scanning the passengers. Some were still whispering, exchanging confused glances. Others seemed strangely calm, as if they knew what was coming, or maybe they just didn't know what to make of it all. But all of them were waiting for something to happen. And for Maya, the weight of that expectation was unbearable. She glanced toward the back of the plane, where the young woman from earlier had taken her seat. The girl's eyes met hers again, a silent encouragement that helped steady Maya's nerves. But then her phone buzzed in her pocket. The notification made her freeze. It was a message from the captain. "Maya, you need to come to the cockpit immediately." Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what had changed in the few minutes since they last spoke, but whatever it wasn't good. She walked down the narrow aisle, the hum of the plane now louder than ever. Each step felt like an eternity. She reached the cockpit door and knocked once before entering. Captain Daniel and First Officer Lila were seated at the controls, both of them looking unusually tense. Maya couldn't help but notice the deep furrow in their brows, the weight of their silence. "What's going on?" Maya asked, trying to mask the uncertainty in her voice. Captain Daniel turned his chair toward her, his expression grave. "We've got a problem. The man in first class, the one who started this whole mess, his lawyer's already on the phone with the airline. They're demanding that we make an emergency landing. Apparently, they've got media on standby, ready to cover this as a scandal." Maya felt her stomach lurch. This wasn't just about a flight now. It was a spectacle, a public case about race, and whether or not she had the right to stand up for herself. "Is the media involved?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "They will be soon," Lila added, her voice barely a whisper. "The man's made it clear he's going to frame this as a personal attack. He's counting on the world to sympathize with him." Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had known there might be fallout, but the speed with which everything was escalating was terrifying. Her mind raced, replaying the moment when she'd spoken those words. Had she overstepped? Would the airline back her? Was it worth the risk? "We're going to have to land somewhere soon," Captain Daniel said, his voice tight. "We're close to the nearest airport, but we need to prepare for the aftermath. We need to know what we're walking into when we land." Maya nodded, but inside, her thoughts were a whirlpool. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the thousands of other flight attendants, the ones who had silently endured racism and discrimination every single day. This was about making a statement. But how far could she take it? "Do you want me to speak to the passengers?" she asked, suddenly feeling the need to address them before things went further out of control. Lila shook her head. "We'll need to get through this landing first. No need to make things worse." As Maya left the cockpit, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice rang through the speakers, calm but with an underlying tension, "we will be landing shortly at the nearest airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will keep you updated as we prepare for an unexpected change in our arrival plan." The moment the announcement was over, the plane was filled with the sound of murmurs and nervous glances. The entire cabin seemed to vibrate with the uncertainty in the air. Maya returned to the main cabin, her eyes scanning the faces of the passengers. The man from first class was silent now, but his eyes were dark with anger. He looked like he was plotting something. A few rows ahead, Maya spotted the young woman again, her gaze steady and unwavering. It was as if the girl was silently supporting her, her presence a small but powerful reminder that Maya wasn't alone in this fight. But the truth was, Maya was scared. She didn't know what would happen when they landed. She didn't know what kind of world they would be stepping into when the plane touched down. As the plane neared its destination, Maya walked through the cabin, her eyes locked on the man in first class. His cold stare followed her, but she held her ground. This was it. The final moment. The conclusion of everything she had started. And then, just as she was about to reach the rear galley, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been informed that the media is already gathering at the airport. We're about to land in a matter of minutes, and we ask that you please stay calm as we prepare for the emergency response to this situation." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The media. They were really doing this. But before she could process the full weight of the announcement, something unexpected happened. The man in first class stood up suddenly, his hands raised in the air. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You'll regret this." The entire cabin fell into stunned silence. Was he really going to escalate this even further? And what would happen when they landed? The plane's wheels touched the runway with a slight jolt, signaling their arrival at an airport they hadn't planned for. The hum of the engines slowly faded as the plane taxied to the gate, but the tension in the cabin only seemed to intensify. Every passenger was on edge, eyes darting from one person to the next, uncertain of what was coming next. And Maya, standing near the galley, felt like she was bracing for an earthquake that she couldn't avoid. The man in first class, still seething, was muttering under his breath. Maya could see the anger in his face, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest. She knew that when the plane landed, the chaos would spill out of the cabin, and whatever happened next would change everything. As the plane finally came to a stop, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we've completed the disembarkation process. Authorities are waiting for us at the gate to assist with any inquiries." The announcement wasn't just a routine safety precaution, it was a warning. Maya's stomach churned as she looked out the window and saw several police cars, their lights flashing in the distance. Media trucks were already parked near the terminal, the cameras ready to capture whatever unfolded. Maya's pulse quickened. This was real. The flight she had been working on for the last few hours wasn't just another day at the office. It was becoming the center of a media storm. The flight attendants, who had been silent until now, began moving through the cabin, preparing for the moment when the doors would open. Maya's mind was racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. Before she could make another move, the young woman from earlier, the one who had quietly shown her support, came up to her again, this time standing in the aisle, looking at her with calm eyes. "You did the right thing," she said softly, but her voice held a weight that Maya hadn't expected. "You made a stand. But we can't pretend it's over." Maya nodded, feeling a sense of solidarity, but a deep fear still gnawed at her. "I didn't expect it to go this far," she admitted. "I thought maybe I could stop it, or at least control it. But now..." The young woman's eyes softened. "I know. But what you did, it wasn't just for you. You're showing everyone that silence is no longer an option. Maybe you don't know it yet, but you're inspiring people. You're starting something bigger than you." Maya didn't have time to process those words. Just then, the captain emerged from the cockpit and walked toward the front of the cabin. His face was set in grim determination. "Okay, everyone," Captain Daniel announced, his voice strong but laced with a tension that hung in the air, "we'll be deplaning shortly. The authorities will be here in a minute to speak with the passengers and crew. We have to stay calm. Understand?" The flight attendants nodded in unison, and Maya did too, though her mind was far from calm. As the doors of the plane opened and passengers began to disembark, a sense of unease settled in the cabin. Maya watched as the man from first class stood up, his shoulders squared, as if preparing for a battle. He was on his phone again, no doubt rallying his lawyer, or worse, contacting the media to spin his side of the story. The terminal was a flurry of activity as the passengers slowly filed out. Maya could feel the weight of every step as she followed them down the aisle, trying to remain composed. Her heart was pounding, her breath shallow. She couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. Would she be escorted off the plane by the police? Would she face the wrath of the media, or worse, her airline? As she walked down the jet bridge and into the terminal, the blinding lights of the news cameras almost blinded her. Reporters, microphones in hand, were waiting near the gate, and a few scattered passengers were already talking to them, eager to offer their perspectives on the incident. Maya's heart raced as she was escorted to the side, out of the spotlight. She looked up to see the young woman from the plane standing nearby. The girl had stayed behind, watching, perhaps waiting for something. "Are you okay?" the young woman asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Maya nodded, though the words felt hollow. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what's going to happen." Just then, the man from first class appeared, flanked by two security officers. His face was a mask of fury, but he wasn't heading toward the reporters. No, he was heading straight toward Maya, his eyes locked on hers. "You," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret this. You'll never work another flight again." Maya stood her ground, refusing to look away. "You think I'm afraid of you?" she asked, her voice steady. "You're not the first person to try and tear me down." The man sneered. "You're making a big mistake." Before Maya could respond, the security officers moved in, separating the two of them. They told the man to calm down, but the damage was already done. His threats had set the stage for a bigger confrontation. As Maya stood there, watching the scene unfold, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a notification that made her heart skip a beat. "Maya, we need to talk. Meet us outside the terminal. It's about what happened on your flight." It was from an unknown number. Who could this be? Was it someone from her airline, or had the media somehow gotten hold of her information? As the man from first class was led away by the security officers, Maya felt the full weight of the moment crash down on her. She had no idea what would happen next. Would she be facing consequences for her actions, or would she finally get the support she needed? What do you think will happen now? Will Maya's stand have a lasting impact, or will she face even more challenges ahead? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Maya's hands were shaking as she looked down at her phone. The text message sat there, unread for a few moments, but it burned through her like a fire she couldn't ignore. The unknown number had sent a cryptic message, and the implications of it weighed heavily on her chest. She couldn't afford to ignore it, not now. The entire airport seemed to be buzzing with the fallout from the incident. The security officers were ushering the man away, but Maya knew that wasn't the last she'd hear of him. His threats still hung in the air, lingering like a storm cloud, ready to burst. But the message on her phone was different. It wasn't from him. Whoever it was, they wanted to meet her outside the terminal. The vague nature of the message only added to the urgency, and Maya had no idea who could be reaching out to her. "Are you sure you're okay?" The young woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. Maya turned to find her standing there, concern etched on her face. "I can tell you're shaken." "I don't know what's going on anymore," Maya admitted, her voice low. "Everything's spiraling out of control. I thought I was just doing what was right, but now it feels like I'm in the middle of a whirlwind. The man, his lawyer, the media, everything's about to hit the fan." The girl looked around, glancing at the reporters, who were now focused on the flight attendants. She lowered her voice. "I think you need to see who sent that message. It could be important." Maya glanced back at the text. The terminal was chaotic, and she wasn't sure if it was wise to leave right now. But something told her that if she stayed, she'd only sink further into the storm. She needed answers. She needed clarity. "Can you hold my place here?" Maya asked, looking at the girl. The young woman nodded, offering a small, encouraging smile. "I'll keep an eye on things for you. You go find out what this is about." Maya nodded gratefully before turning and walking briskly toward the exit. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but there was no turning back now. As she stepped outside the terminal into the cold evening air, she saw a dark figure standing by the parking lot, leaning casually against a black SUV. Her pulse quickened. Was this the person who sent the message? There was a chill in the air, and a sinking feeling in Maya's stomach told her that something was about to shift in a way she hadn't expected. The figure straightened as she approached, and as Maya drew closer, she could see it was a man, tall, dark hair, wearing a simple jacket and jeans. He looked ordinary enough, but there was something about the way he stood that made Maya feel like she was being watched by someone who had already figured out the outcome of this entire situation. "You, Maya." The man's voice was low, but there was an edge to it, like he wasn't just anyone. Maya hesitated but nodded. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" The man didn't immediately answer. Instead, he glanced around, making sure no one was paying attention before he motioned for her to come closer. Maya took a cautious step forward, unsure of what to make of the situation. "My name's Alex," he said finally. "I've been following the situation on your flight. I have some information that might be helpful for you." Maya narrowed her eyes, her instincts on high alert. "Helpful? What are you talking about?" Alex looked around again, his expression tense. "Listen, I don't have much time. You're about to face some serious backlash for what happened on that plane. That man you argued with, he's connected. Very well connected." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. Connected? She didn't know how to respond. The idea that the man had connections beyond what she could see was terrifying. "He's got ties to some powerful people," Alex continued, "and he's not going to stop until you're ruined. But I can help. I know what's coming next." Maya felt the weight of his words. She was already under fire, and now the realization that the man had connections only added fuel to the fire. Could she trust Alex? Or was he just another player in this complicated game? "Why are you helping me?" Maya asked, skepticism clear in her voice. Alex gave a short laugh, but it wasn't a reassuring one. "Let's just say I've seen this kind of thing before. I've been on the other side of things, and I know how people like him work. They'll try to bury you, but I can help you fight back." Maya stood there, her thoughts racing. She didn't know who Alex was, and part of her wanted to walk away. But another part, The part that had spoken out on the plane, that had stood up for herself, was determined to keep pushing forward. "You can help me fight back?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "How?" Alex stepped forward, lowering his voice. "There's a way to turn the tables. But it's risky. I'm going to need you to trust me if you want to expose the truth. He's not the only one who's been using their power in this way." Maya's mind raced. Trusting Alex was a gamble, but so far, she hadn't exactly had great odds playing it safe. She nodded slowly. "Okay. What's the plan?" Alex smiled, a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. "The first step is simple. Keep the media focused on the right thing. We control the narrative. Let's give them something they can't ignore." Before Maya could ask what he meant, Alex's phone buzzed, and his face turned serious. "Something's happening," he muttered, then turned his gaze back to her. "We don't have much time. Stay close. And trust me on this." Maya had no idea what she was getting herself into, but one thing was clear: her life was about to change forever. And as she followed Alex into the SUV, she couldn't help but wonder, was she making the right choice? Or had she just stepped into a trap that she couldn't escape? The SUV sped through the city streets, the glow of the streetlights blurring past in a dizzying streak of yellow and white. Maya sat in the back seat, her heart racing. She had no idea who Alex was or why he seemed so confident that he could help her, but for the first time since everything had spiraled out of control, a small sliver of hope flickered inside her. She was done being a passive player in this game. She wanted to take control. But how? Alex's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen briefly before tucking it back into his pocket. The tension in the car was palpable, but Alex didn't seem nervous. In fact, he almost seemed calm in the face of the storm they were about to face. "We're heading to a safe spot," Alex said, his voice steady, betraying none of the anxiety Maya could feel coiling around her chest. "I'll explain more when we get there. But right now, we need to keep the media distracted. If they latch on to the wrong part of this story, everything you've worked for could come crashing down." Maya turned toward him. "Distract them with what?" "Your story," Alex replied without hesitation. "We're going to turn it around. But first, you need to make sure the media keeps their focus on the man who started all this. Make him the villain. If you do that, they won't be able to ignore him. They'll dig into his background, and they'll find something that could turn the whole narrative in your favor." Maya swallowed hard. Was he serious? Could she really shift the focus like that? "And how am I supposed to do that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "I don't have the power to control the press. You don't know what it's like, being just a flight attendant." Alex turned to look at her, his expression softening for the first time since they'd met. "That's exactly the point. You are just a flight attendant. And that's why you have the power. No one expects you to stand up to someone like him. But when you do, people notice. The press loves an underdog. You just need to give them the story they can't resist." Maya nodded slowly. She hadn't considered that before. Her job, her background, everything she thought worked against her could, in fact, be the very thing that made her story so compelling. As the SUV pulled into a dark, quiet parking garage, Maya's thoughts swirled. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was in way over her head. But there was no turning back now. "We're here," Alex said, pulling the car into an empty spot. He turned off the engine and climbed out. "Let's go." Maya followed him out of the vehicle, her legs heavy with uncertainty. The parking garage was eerily silent, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. They walked toward a small elevator tucked in the corner, and Alex pressed the button to take them up. "You know, this all feels a bit crazy," Maya said, trying to break the silence as the elevator hummed upward. Alex gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Crazy is the least of your worries. But trust me, you're not alone in this. We have allies. People who are ready to help you." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Allies? Who exactly?" Alex didn't answer immediately, and just as she was about to ask again, the elevator door slid open with a soft chime. They stepped into a small office, filled with low lighting and sleek furniture. There was a large table in the middle of the room, with papers scattered across it. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency. "Sit," Alex said, gesturing toward the table. Maya hesitated before sitting down. So who are these allies? What's really going on? Alex didn't waste time. These are people who've been through similar battles. People who know how the system works and how it can be bent. We're going to expose that man, the one who made those racist remarks. We're going to show the world who he really is, and we're going to make sure that the media has no choice but to turn their focus on him. Maya was still trying to process his words when the door to the office opened, and two more figures entered. Both were women, one older and the other younger. The older woman was tall, with sharp features and a confident air. The younger one was about Maya's age, her eyes filled with curiosity. "This is Claire and Jordan," Alex introduced them. "They've helped people like you before. Claire specializes in getting the media to focus on the right things. Jordan here's an expert at digging up dirt. Whatever we need to uncover about that man, she'll find it." Claire nodded at Maya and took a seat at the table. "We've been following your case closely. We believe you have a shot at turning this around. But you need to be prepared. The road ahead won't be easy. You'll be attacked from all sides." Maya looked between the three of them. "And what do you want from me?" "We need you to be the face of this," Alex said. "You're the one who started it. You're the one who made the stand. And now, we need to make sure your message reaches the right people." Maya leaned forward, her mind racing. It was a lot to take in, but something about it felt right. She was tired of being the victim, of standing silently in the shadows while people like the man on her flight used their privilege to tear others down. She wanted justice. She wanted to make sure that no one else had to go through what she'd been through. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "Let's do it." Claire smiled, her eyes glinting with approval. "Good. Because we've got work to do. And if we play this right, we're not just taking down a racist passenger. We're sending a message to anyone who thinks they can get away with this." As Maya sat there, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had a plan now, a way forward. But she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were forces at play far beyond her control, and she'd have to fight every step of the way. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this. The hours that followed felt like days. Maya sat at the table, surrounded by Claire, Alex, and Jordan, as they meticulously planned out the steps that would shift the narrative and expose the man who had tried to ruin her. Claire had already begun to formulate a strategy to get the media's attention, but Maya knew it wasn't going to be simple. The man's connections were powerful, and the media was notoriously fickle. She couldn't afford to slip up. "Here's what we're going to do," Claire said, laying out a stack of papers in front of Maya. "We're going to leak a piece of information, something the press can't ignore. We make sure they focus on him, not you." Maya's eyes scanned the papers. They were filled with details about the man, the one who had used racial slurs, the one who had tried to manipulate the situation. The more she learned about him, the angrier she became. This wasn't just about a single flight or a single incident. This man was a representation of the unchecked power of privilege, and he wasn't going to get away with it. "How are we going to get them to care about this?" Maya asked. "He's rich, he's powerful, and he's got lawyers. Why would the media care?" Jordan, who had been quietly analyzing the documents, looked up. "Because power is exactly what makes people angry. Everyone loves an underdog, Maya. You're the underdog in this fight, and people are going to want to see you win. But only if you give them a reason to." Claire leaned forward. "Jordan's right. If we can find something that links this man to more than just a few bad words, something that shows his true character, something real, we can flip the narrative." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had already seen the ugly side of this man's personality firsthand. But she hadn't thought it would go this far. "What do you mean, something real?" Claire looked at her, her eyes sharp. "People like him, they don't just spew hate at one person. It's a pattern. And once we find that pattern, we expose it. No one can ignore that. But we'll need to move fast." Jordan added, "I've got a few things I'm already looking into. This guy has a history. Let's just say, if we dig deep enough, there's a chance we can find something that'll change everything." Maya stared at the papers in front of her, her mind whirling. She'd gone from being a flight attendant to the center of a national scandal, and now, suddenly, she was in the position to fight back. She had no idea what she was getting into, but one thing was certain: There was no going back now. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and her heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize the number, but she felt a sense of dread wash over her. Was it the man's lawyer? Or someone else trying to manipulate the situation? She answered it, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Hello. Maya, it's Alex," came his voice on the other end of the line. "We've got a problem." Maya's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "I'm not sure who, but someone's leaking information about your past," Alex said quickly. "Someone knows about the incident on your flight, and they're trying to spin it into a story that makes you look like the aggressor. The media's already starting to pick it up." Her breath caught in her throat. "What? How is that even possible?" "I don't know," Alex's voice was tight with frustration. "But they're going to twist this if we don't act fast. You need to keep your story consistent. Don't let them take the focus off of the man who started all of this. We need to stay ahead of them." Maya's mind raced. This was exactly what they had feared. The media was already being manipulated, and the truth was slipping away from her grasp. But she couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let him turn everything around and make her the villain. "Okay, we need to move faster," Maya said, her voice gaining strength. "Let's stick to the plan, but we need to get the press's attention right now. We can't wait any longer." Claire and Jordan exchanged a look before nodding in agreement. "We're with you," Claire said. "It's time to put everything into motion. We'll get ahead of this leak before it spreads." Maya hung up the phone and stood up, her resolve hardening. The walls were closing in on her, and the stakes were higher than ever. She wasn't going to be silenced. Not now, not ever. The rest of the evening was a blur of action. They set up interviews with local news outlets. Working with a media contact, Claire had to ensure that the story would land in the right hands. Alex, who had been handling some of the logistics, came back with a small but powerful piece of information that he'd uncovered. The man in question had been involved in a previous discrimination lawsuit. A case that had quietly been swept under the rug. But now, with the right exposure, it could come to light. "This is it," Alex said, holding up a file. "We've got our angle." Maya took the file and skimmed the details. The man had been involved in a legal dispute with a former employee, an employee who had accused him of racial discrimination. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, but if they could prove the pattern of behavior, the press would have no choice but to focus on him. "We'll use this," Maya said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "We'll show them who he really is." Claire nodded. "We're ready. Let's put the plan in motion." Just as they were about to finalize everything, Maya's phone buzzed again, and her heart stopped. It was a message from an unknown number. "I wouldn't keep going if I were you. This is bigger than you think." Maya's blood ran cold. Who was this? And how did they know what she was planning? Was there someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes? Someone who wanted to keep this man's secrets buried? And if so, were they willing to stop her at any cost? The message sat on Maya's phone, its words haunting her. "I wouldn't keep going if I were you. This is bigger than you think." The uncertainty gnawed at her as she stared at the screen. Was it a threat? Or just someone trying to throw her off course? "Who's it from?" Claire asked, noticing the sudden shift in Maya's expression. Maya didn't answer right away, her mind racing. Who could be behind this? Had the man's connections already reached her? Or was there someone else with even more power, trying to suppress the truth? "I don't know," Maya finally replied, her voice steady, though her insides were anything but. "But it doesn't matter. I'm not stopping now. I'm too far in." Alex and Jordan exchanged looks, and for a moment, Maya could see the concern in their eyes. They knew what was at stake. "You're right," Alex said, his voice tight. "We've come this far, and we can't back down now. But we need to move carefully. Whoever is behind this has power, and they won't hesitate to use it." The clock was ticking. The media was already buzzing about the flight, the man's lawsuit, and the escalating drama. Maya's team had prepared a series of interviews, and they were ready to make the man's past public, but this new threat made everything feel even more dangerous. "I'm going to the press conference," Maya said, her decision made. "I'm going to tell my side of the story. The whole truth. We're not just exposing him, we're exposing the whole system. We can't let them win." Claire placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, her eyes filled with determination. "We've got your back." "Whatever happens, we stand with you." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore, and that made all the difference. The weight of the decision still hung heavily on her, but there was no turning back. She had already made her stand. The press conference was a circus. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the room was filled with a buzz of anticipation. The moment Maya stepped up to the podium, the noise quieted, and all eyes were on her. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't waver. For a moment, she let the silence settle before speaking. "I'm Maya Johnson, a flight attendant on Flight 320. And today, I am here to speak the truth." Her words echoed through the room, and she could feel the weight of the audience's gaze on her. The man, the one who had started this whole ordeal, sat in the back, his arms crossed, looking as though he were just waiting for her to fail. But she wasn't going to fail. She told her story, everything that had happened on that flight, every word that had been hurled at her, every insult that had been thrown her way. She didn't hold back. She spoke about her life as a flight attendant, the discrimination she had endured, and the systemic racism that often went unnoticed until it was too late. The reporters scribbled furiously, the room filled with murmurs of shock. Maya could see that some of them were already rethinking the narrative they'd been handed. Then, she dropped the bombshell. "Not only am I here to tell my side of the story," she said, her voice steady, "but I'm here to expose a man who has been hiding behind his wealth and power. A man who has used his position to manipulate situations just like this. A man who has been involved in a discrimination lawsuit before, but has used his connections to bury the truth." The room fell silent. Maya looked directly at the cameras. "This man isn't just a racist. He's a predator, and I won't let him get away with it anymore." The reporters were quick to pick up on the angle. The camera lights flashed, and questions came fast and furious. But Maya stood her ground. She was done being silent. Hours later, news outlets were reporting on the case. The man's past was laid bare for the world to see, and the media couldn't ignore the pattern of behavior that had emerged. It wasn't just a moment of anger on a flight, it was part of a much larger issue, one that was systemic and pervasive. Maya's decision to speak up had changed everything. The public outcry was swift, and it wasn't long before the man's connections started to unravel. The media dug deeper, finding evidence of more instances of his discriminatory behavior. The lawsuit he had tried to hide was no longer buried. For the first time, Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The story wasn't just about her anymore, it was about justice. It was about showing the world that when people like this man thought they could get away with it, someone would be there to fight back. As the story gained traction, Maya received messages from people all over the country. Flight attendants, workers, everyday people, thanking her for speaking out, for taking a stand when so many had been too afraid to. She had become a symbol of resilience, of strength in the face of adversity. The final twist came weeks later when an anonymous source came forward. They revealed the true depth of the man's connections, ties to political figures, business moguls, and influential media personalities. It wasn't just about one flight, it was about a network that had been enabling this kind of behavior for years. The truth had won. The man was forced to face the consequences of his actions. The public shamed him, and the legal system was finally forced to address the discrimination he had long avoided. Maya stood in front of her apartment window that evening, looking out at the city. It had been a long, hard journey, but she had made it through. She had stood up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was a voice for change. The phone buzzed in her pocket. She picked it up, and a text message popped up on the screen. "You did it. We all did. Thank you." It was from the young woman on the flight. Maya smiled. Her story had ended with justice, but the journey was far from over. There were more battles to fight, more voices to amplify. And Maya was ready for whatever came next. What do you think? Was Maya's fight worth it? How do you feel about the story's resolution? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for following Maya's journey. Until next time.